Hello and welcome to the BuiltOnAir podcast. BuiltOnAir is a regular podcast where we talk with everyday people and learn about the amazing things they are doing with Airtable. Today's podcast is sponsored by OpenSide, the leading solutions provider for Airtable customers. Check out openside.com to learn more about their products and services that can take your Airtable usage to the next level. Use promo code BuiltOnAir to receive $20 towards any product purchase.
In this episode, we're joined by Brian Switchkow, a founding citizen at One Inc Cooperative. One Inc operates as a member-owned, member-controlled virtual economy dedicated to fostering a supportive ecosystem of creatives, entrepreneurs, and investors. Brian and his fellow citizens have helped bring dozens of unique projects to fruition, including a very nifty spell check for the soul. But not all contributions are monetary. Citizens can contribute 5 different types of capital to a project. There's financial, but also intellectual, spiritual, cultural, and social capital at any given time. If that sounds like it requires a lot of data, it's because it does. With so many moving parts, it comes as no surprise that Brian's 2 Airtable bases have a number of fields, views, and tables to manage it all. But the beauty of Brian's approach is that it allows citizens to interact with a clean, simple interface which only shows what needs to be shown with the help of a few handy integrations. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being on our podcast. I have a great many number of questions. You've done a great many number of things. So you've built a bunch of different digital projects ranging from an AI version of yourself to a virtual economy, and I want to talk about both.
Yay.
Your pick. Which one do you want to explain to me first?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and offering me the opportunity to nerd out about nerdy things that are somewhere between building products and making art. Usually hard to distinguish which is which. Probably Brian Bot, just because it seems like it's relevant context. And then also my Facebook prank is kind of like the genesis story of pranking my roommate with Facebook ads, and then that going viral, and then kind of being woken to this idea of like, if you create value, then awareness will follow. Or if you create things out of pure creativity for the sake of, I wonder if I can do that, and like, let's play with this and let's see what happens. That tends to be what people are interested in. And I spent so much time consulting with companies that were trying to get growth. They were hiring me as a growth hacker. And they were like, how do we get people to pay attention? And I'm like, well, who are you?
Good question.
They would kind of just, by the nature of appeasing investors or having kind of like, the obligation to stakeholders, they would work and do, and the play and the being was gone. And so you kind of like lost the natural essence of whoever the individuals were within that organization. So after a while, I got tired of it and started doing my own stuff. And I was kind of always doing stuff on the side, but I just slowly over time allocated more time. Brian Bot originated from partially from Mythos, which is kind of my subjective wiki nonlinear storytelling platform doohickey that still defies a lot of explanation. It was actually, I got really absorbed into writing in that format and just kind of like having this chunked methodology of writing. For about 2 weeks, I didn't call my parents, didn't realize it. And then 2 weeks goes by, my dad calls me and he's like, hey, like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm good. Kind of like snapping out of the days, and caught up with my dad. And then, he was like, call your mom. I called my mom. My mom was like, call your sister. So I called my sister. And was like, I haven't talked to my grandparents. I called my grandparents. I like made the rounds after like 2 weeks of just unintentional kind of absence. And in every single conversation, I realized that it was, how are you doing? And then I'd be like, oh, I'm doing these things. And I'm like, so excited. And I'm building stuff. And they're like, okay, we don't understand that. And then they'd be like, well, are you doing anything fun? I'm like, that's fun. And then I'd like that. I'm also doing like, yoga and gymnastics and stuff like that. And they're like, okay, well, are you seeing anyone? And then I'm like, well, not really, like, da da da. And so I basically realized that every single conversation that I had with my family in that period of like catching up was this roundabout way of like, are you dating anyone? So that was the point when I was like, hold on, I have the ability to do things like this. So I made a chat bot that was initially explicitly focused on answering my parents' questions about my dating life. And that's where Brian Bot came from. It slowly became like, what else can I automate? It started with kind of basic Boolean chat of if and then over time gained fuzzy logic and a bunch of comical wrong answers. And so just kind of always playing with people. He has a phone number now, and 310-455-8836 for anyone who's listening. Sometimes it's the bot and sometimes it's me, and we're never really sure which is which. So yeah.
So you're just a prankster.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it always stems from messing around in some form.
I can dig it. I have similar points where not so much I go 2 weeks without calling my mom because she makes sure that I talk to her often, which is great. I love her. But I feel like sometimes some of the things that I do are so niche, I have to re-explain what it is I do. It's one thing to say, oh, I'm a host of a podcast. It's a podcast about databases. Well, specifically this one type of database. You know what I mean? Like there's a formula.
It's a context challenge. Yes. And everybody comes in with different contexts. And when I wrote the Facebook prank, by the time I wrote it, because I had never really written anything prior, but by the time I wrote it, I told the story 100 times. And I told it to like marketing friends, and it would take 2 hours, and I would just, like embellish the details and be like, and I would explain, like, I would tell it before I had this term, creative nonfiction. So like you take a moment and you just colorize and you explain all the details so that people can see it. But then I'd explain it to my mom and it'd take 10 seconds. Cause like, okay, my roommate? Yeah. Those ads you see on your sidebar? Yeah. I made ads that only appeared for him and made him think that Facebook knew way too much about his life. Mom was like, oh, that's funny. Why'd you do that? Well, he started it. Cool, done, conversation over. And so that's a lot of what Mythos is enabling many different people with many different degrees of context to read the same thing. And all of that is just kind of chunking information, which is coincidentally the same way that databases and Airtable works.
Makes sense. And I do feel like now I must mention your shirt, which reads fictional character.
Yes. This is one of my favorites. Yeah, it came from Alan Watts. He talks about the skin encapsulated ego, and then this shirt was inspired by J.P. Sears, and it's just kind of a reminder for ego death, a reminder that like we're all building characters of ourselves and we can change those anytime. As Alan Watts said, he's like, you are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. And so, I mean, as long as we communicate to the people around us, like, hey, I'm going to stop doing this thing that you know me to do because I don't want to anymore. Then you can kind of consciously just choose to build yourself into the person you choose to be. Yeah, it's been kind of a practice and play. And I always am trying to coach people and like, hey, like put down the ego and we can move on from this. And it comes up in a lot of different ways.
Is one of those different ways One Inc?
It is, very much, yeah. The underlying premise of One Inc is that we are one. And so the first thing is to kind of absolve yourself of any ego and importance, not to leave behind your individuality, but quite the opposite, to bring your individuality in the acknowledgement that we are one. In a microcosmic sense, bacterially, diversity is power. And so the more diversity that we can cultivate, the better. And the way that we do that is by helping everybody to feel safe to show up that way. And that first starts with the acknowledgement that we are one in whatever sense that you decide that to be it we are one in the sense that we are the universe, we are one in the sense that we are the totality of all being, we are one in the sense that we are the same ecological whole of planet Earth, the same species, although I like to push it outside of the human element to be less humanist. But yeah, starting with the destruction of egos is a good step to almost everything.
Well said. So, in addition to the diversity of having everyone coming together and being part of a whole, you also have in One Inc a diversity in terms of the different ways people can participate, right? So, with any given idea or project, not all the time someone might be able to invest in the literal sense in, giving money to support an idea, but you have found a way to make sure that everyone can feel like they're still participating and still providing, again, I'm doing air quotes, value. You're participating and you're being part of the thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, even the way that you reflected that is fun, because like you said literal capital in regards to money, and you did air quotes in terms to like contributing, and that's how we're trained, right? Those are the contexts that we have, right? Like the economy that you and I are within, which is the United States economy, so we deal with the dollar, and the dollar typically is awarded to those who contribute time, which is natural capital, labor, and that's kind of it. That doesn't mean that other forms of capital don't exist. It just means that that's what our economy typically measures. And so John, my co-incorporator, and I read The Ascent of Humanity by Charles Eisenstein in early 2019. And one of the things he talks about is different types of capital. And so there's financial capital, which is money. There's natural capital, which is time and creative labors. There's cultural capital, which is art. There's intellectual capital, which is wisdom or knowledge. There's social capital, which is relationships or political influence. And then there's spiritual capital, which is attention and presence. And in the context of Facebook, you pay for the service with your spiritual capital. And they don't write that into their terms of service explicitly in that way, but that is what you were paying with. I forget who said it was, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And we're finding a lot of the implications of that now as it regards mental health. But all of these forms of capital already exist. And so it kind of just started with a conversation of like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what else is of value. And so John and I started co-creating together around a project called Spiritual Bro, which is a spirit check. So if you say something negative, it suggests a positive reframe. That's where the t-shirts came into being. And we started to have these conversations of like, okay, you're putting up financial capital to free up my natural capital so that we can come together and co-create, and we can unlock our spiritual capital, because the notion of spiritual capital is that you have it innately within you. And so by us being together and co-creating on this and having conversations about it, we were elevating ourselves and kind of connecting to that attention and presence. And so with John's financial capital and my natural capital, we unlocked our spiritual capital and created something that became social capital. And you can play that game all day long. There's an infinite number of ways to talk about it, so long as you acknowledge that there's more value in the world than money. And that was how it started. The economy and the ledger is all just building bricks on top of that.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that you'll find with really online content creators. You'll notice that, there's opportunities to, I think it's called joining a membership on YouTube, where you contribute monetarily to a channel, but you're constantly being asked by the content that you love to subscribe and to share with your friends. And right. So that's, that gets to your description of all the other different types of capital, which, and I'm sure, as you know, someone who's gone viral many times, the process of sharing and giving attention, that's just as valuable, and if not more so.
Yeah, and I think it's, creators often have to ask for those contributions because people don't value it. They don't think that sharing it with a friend is of value. So that's why that kind of verbal mechanism often exists of asking. And so a lot of it's just really training, being like, hey, you already have these contributions. Those are valued. Give whatever you choose to give. And so really just strictly as a foundation for conversation, it's been awesome.
I'm sure it is. And then just to connect back to some of the other forms of capital, intellectual or giving advice or suggestions or asking or even asking questions. Like a lot of the times I improve the work that I do when someone is not trying to give me advice. They're just like, how does this work? And then I have to think about it.
Yeah.
super valuable.
Yeah, a human walking through my background for those listening on Spotify. Sometimes she crawls through the background occasionally when she doesn't know the context of the call, but not
Fine.
today.
Totally
Yeah.
fine.
She doesn't need to do either, but it's entertaining. Anyway, yeah, and the intellectual capital aspect, tying back to Mythos and Spiritual Bro. Mythos, it was built because I wanted a knowledge management tool, but then it became something else. It became more of a storytelling tool, but I didn't quite know how that was different at the time. And so John and I made a joke about, like, I wish I had a spell check for my spirit. So when I say negative things, like, it'd catch me. And he's like, that's really funny. We should build that. And then the idea became that because we couldn't figure out how to raise money for Mythos without changing its nature, without like turning it into a thing where we kept trying to get users and like play that game of like how many people can we get to pay this amount per month, and then build that specific feature set forever. Instead of raising money and kind of pitting ourselves in that way, we're like, what if we build Spiritual Bro as a character on top of the Mythos platform? And so that mechanism of transition came from one comment from a different advisor, where he saw me struggling to try and sell Mythos to bring in money to fund development and to create that traction so that we could raise money. And he said, you can sell your product or you can use your product. I recommend the latter. And that was it. And it was a complete transformation of my thinking in one sentence. And for that, I will always be grateful. And the economy is, in a lot of ways, a way of recognizing the power of those like singular statements where someone just makes a sentence that change your life. Just like the right sentence, the right time, the right intonation, and being able to, like, I can't possibly quantify the value of that statement, but I'm going to write it down, and we're always going to look back at it, and we'll always be able to say that this came from that, this came from that, here is where this started. And it's just kind of like a mechanism for gratitude in a frame. And so, yeah, it's a giant database of stories.
Would you like to show us it?
Absolutely.
Because we here love to look at databases. I don't know if you've noticed.
So this is what the front end, or one of the front ends, look like. So I'm going to show kind of a few screens on the front before I show the back.
Sure.
So this is the ledger. You can see all the contributions of the ledger. It's endless scroll, which is super fun. So you have the citizen name, contributed the value. So our $11, this is a resonance dollar, is a unified measure of all types of capital. Then you have the type of capital, which is spiritual capital, contribution to. So these are all of our different projects, which we call stories of the cooperative. And then on the date. So in this specific instance, Chris updated his preferences. So basically we allow people to subscribe to whatever they choose to subscribe to as it regards a cooperative. We have over 150 projects at this point that are all kind of at varying stages of development. And so every time someone goes and updates their preferences, they are helping us to be more aligned. So we reward them with our base unit, which is 11. So 11 is the number that represents presence. So we're like, cool, that's our base unit. If you tell us you want to hear from more of our subscriptions, great, $11 dollars. And so here's a contribution of 11 financial capital dollars, so 11 US dollars into One Citizenship. You have, and this one I'm not familiar with, so I'm just reading it. I'm discovering this at the same time. Sasha was helpful with One Gatherings. You also get things like this, these little memo emojis, click into stories about that specific contribution, which I'll let that load for a moment. And so, let's see if I can. We have our incorrectly linked portfolio. I think that's a cookie on my computer. So we have our, oh, and this is what happens when you change things in your database. This, I removed status from the title name. All right, let's do, we have, a reading list where we reward people a bounty for reading a book that helps them to essentially become a more productive citizen. These are books about companies that mimic life, the ascent of humanity, as was mentioned previously. What else? I think it's stories. Yeah, it is. These are all of the stories of the cooperative. So you have Spiritual Bro, which I mentioned previously, the cooperative itself, Mythos One, which is available to all citizens and is basically how we communicate because there's a lot of context. One Citizenship, One Studio, which is the entity that incubated Mythos One and Spiritual Bro, One Gathering, which is our events production company, and so on and so forth. If you click read more, you obviously get to read more. You get to see the amount of contributions to each story. So this is all types of capital, how much has been contributed to these stories. And then let's go back to, yeah, so, oops. So when you clicked in from Sasha's contribution here, that went here to the One Gatherings expansion plan. As a co-creator in One Gatherings, I was on vacation last week. I had no idea that this conversation happened, but now I do. And so it's like a feed of, like I said, stories, gratitude, all different shapes and forms. And yeah, so on the back end, we have a whole lot of Zapier going on. And Airtable automations are like my new favorite thing. So here's the ledger. It is presently a 1-column ledger, although we're just set up to be a 2-column ledger. So basically you have debits and credits just like any other ledger. We separate out USD because this is basically our expense report, which we use in our actual financial reporting. So we have the recipient, which is a citizen. Some certain citizens can also give residence dollars to friends of residence or non-citizens. So everyone in the world is either a friend of residence or a citizen of one. Then you have these 2 fields here, which are for Slack and email. So when someone is giving through what we call the love machine, they have the ability to send an email and a Slack message. If they choose both, like here, then this is the post message. This will go to the Slack channel that is associated with the project that someone is contributing to. And then it will also show up in the ledger. Somewhere in here. So then we have the memo link, which is this little blue icon taking us to the story, who the citizen is, their citizen ID, what their citizen memo is. So if you click on any of the citizen names, it takes you, there's that one that I was looking for. If you click here, it takes you to their author memo or kind of the little wiki that we have about them. Then you've got some of these fields, which are basically the HTML versions of the capital types. Those are being used in a series of emails that are going out. So anytime someone gets residence dollars, they get an email that says, thank you so much for your contribution of X to this. Let me grab one. You have just received 111 R dollars. So you've just received 111 R dollars for your contribution of multiple types of capital to Brian Switchkow. I think this was a test, but basically you have the value here, the type of capital in HTML here. Then you have a personal note here. And then current balance, the ability to see that your contribution as well as all others, and a prompt to update your preferences. So going back to the database, each project has a channel in our Slack, so that's where all of the messages regarding those projects go. The love machine is largely based on a table of gifts. So these are all of the things that people can give for. And we're constantly adding new things of like, thank you for performing art at one of our events, or thank you for inspiring the purchase of a new domain name. We give that one a lot. And these all are, just kind of all the data that is associated with each gift is then being pulled in and cited in the ledger. A lot of lookup fields and stuff like that, private notes, yada yada. And then we have our citizen IDs. So this is who the person is, their pronouns, their current balance, what badges they have. This is kind of like a quick look field for us, so we can see what type of citizen they are. These two fields are just like a fast look at how much energy has this person put into us. Great for prioritization. Referral field, anytime a CID is linked here, it automatically triggers off a referral email and a ledger gift to say you've received $111 for referring this person to the cooperative. Badges text fields, basically anytime someone upgrades their membership, it adds or it appends a new membership here, the highest of which appears, I removed it from the shared view, the highest of which appears in a different field, which then anytime that changes, OnToAir picks it up and says, okay, your membership level has changed because that field has changed. And then we match whatever is in that field with whatever email is in our library of emails to say, hey, you have upgraded, or you are now this level of citizenship. You now have the ability to send more gifts through the Love Machine. You now have the ability to send more messages through our Resonance Machine, which is basically our collectively accessed email CRM, which I'll show you that base too. And yeah, so everything is essentially structured to be live updated by each individual in this database. So every action they take, every time they show up in an event, they get credit for it. Every time they give someone else credit, they are actually, if you look in balances, and then the competitive lovers table, which is relatively new. This is a table of how many $R people are giving, and then how many $R they're giving based on how many they're receiving. So you get to see kind of like, okay, how much are you helping us to flow and send this energy by whatever definition you measure it. Yeah, so ledger, CIDs, balances, stories. This is where all of the stories of the cooperative are tied. So everything that's associated with every story, from the channel ID in Slack to the HTML representations of a lot of these that are pulled into emails, how much capital has been contributed to each story, frames of reference. So we have Pandemic Playmate is a memo that someone made to talk about that person that you've never met before in your life, but you met through some kind of digital means while in pandemic. So you've never met them before in person, but you're best friends and you play with them online in some form or the other. So two of our citizens bought pandemicplaymate.com and then wrote a memo about it. So like now we get to call each other Pandemic Playmate because they came up with the term. So that's what we call a frame. Frames, gifts that are associated, reflections. That's basically when someone sees the cooperative and they're like, it's like a digital kibbutz. And we're like, cool, we're gonna write that down. Thank you so much for giving us that review. Reflection is basically that. Roadmap is phasing out, metrics is phasing in, subscribers largely lives in another database. Images is what you saw from the story field. And then vote, I love, this is basically picking up vote.inc.1 is where citizens and friends of residents can vote on different matters of the cooperative. So basically they say like, I want, an updated onboarding process, or I want help migrating Mythos to OnePod. And so people have the ability to go through and kind of see what's going on. Anytime something is submitted to this by anyone, it posts an update to the corresponding Slack channel, which is picking up from this field right here. So the nourishing field, this is actually picking up for our recipes. So anyone who posts a recipe to our collective board, it goes into the nourishing channel of Slack, and thus we share recipes. So yeah, that's largely the economy. We are now doing things like bounties, basically saying if anyone can introduce us to someone like this, we will reward you with that. We also have what are functionally shareholder agreements. for virtual corporations is the kind of current project, which you saw here. The co-creator agreement creator is kind of the current thing that we're working on. And so what it is it's essentially a shareholder agreement for a virtual corporation within the cooperative, wholly created within Airtable, but then also, let's see, it will look like this. So using mini extensions, which we found through the BuiltOnAir podcast, we have a citizen dashboard. And so you can see everything about you. You can see your current citizenship, you can see your balance, email, phone number. If you don't know how to, you can access our Slack, attend our gatherings, you can submit a gathering. This goes through Airtable into our collective Google Calendar. You can use the love machine, you can cast your vote. You can send an email as the cooperative itself. That's the resonance machine. This is the love machine. You can edit the messages that you are a co-creator on. You can create an access mythos. You can submit an offer to the marketplace. You can change your subscription, so on and so forth. So yeah, mini extensions has been super great, but a lot of this starts with Airtable. It's managed a lot with Zapier. BuiltOnAir has been a relatively new and super helpful addition, and mini extensions as well. And all of this means that we have the ability to essentially discover what it is that we're doing before we raise money and do it as one cohesive product. Because as soon as you raise money, you have obligations, and those obligations are based on assumptions. And this allows us to get a lot of our assumptions out of the way and validate them. And kind of build this, expansive environment that wouldn't be possible if we had gone a traditional path. And that's, I think, John called One Inc micro liquidity for early stage ventures, which is one of those things that it kind of makes sense, and then you learn more, and then it makes sense, but it doesn't really totally make sense until you have context, and that's what we're all about.
Well, I'm glad that through this podcast we were able to shine light on a few things that might be useful for anyone who uses Airtable, namely, BuiltOnAir, which is produced by our sponsor OpenSide, and then mini extensions, which I also love. What I wanted to point out was that our run through of your base that controls this, I noticed a couple of things, and I'll run through them very quickly. The title said V5. And just want to throw it out there that something this complex with so many moving parts that involves so many people who are contributing in so many different ways, I can't imagine how long it took you to get here. And as you just said, you were recently introduced to, the sort of back end portion of it that kind of, helps take out some of the automation processes that send out some emails and also set up the front end for other people to interact with, so they don't have to dig through an Airtable base with 1,000 different tables. And just, I wanted to talk about how your process of going from, you have this idea, I want to build an economy, and then getting into Airtable, and then getting to where we are now with what we've just seen.
So yeah, so I appreciate the spot of the V5, because to me it's been there for a while, so it's largely invisible. So it wasn't an idea to create an economy and then learn Airtable. 2017 actually, someone introduced me to Airtable, and I don't know who, unfortunately, because I owe them a lot. But they basically pointed me, and I looked at it and I said, this would be really great for a CRM. And what I really wanted, because I had so many different projects over, I had at that time, I was known as a guy who pranked his roommate with Facebook ads, so I'd get a lot of people who called me about Facebook. I was known as a Reddit marketing expert, so I'd get a bunch of people who called me about that. And even in those two pools of people, there's a lot of variation as to why someone might reach out. I want you to consult for me. I want to join your education community. I just want free advice. And it was a lot of energy to figure out who was who and where. And so this idea of a CRM where anyone could manage their relationship with me so that I could just kind of pick up and say, cool, like you want free advice? Great. Like I'm happy to do that so long as I don't have to spend the time assessing like what you want. And you ask a good question. And so a lot of times people be like, how can I use Reddit to market my business? And I'm like, moo, that's not a good question. Moo means not yes, not no, just not nothing. Ask the question again. And so I started there. And that other base is called Ethos, which I'll share real quick. So Ethos is basically that is still the CRM. So in this, I can see, like I sent you an email this morning. So it saw that I sent you an email, it bounced you to the top, and it updated the last time that you were contacted. The last email that the system sent you was $R given when you became a citizen. I can see your citizenship level and your $R balance. All of this is being pulled in from the other base. This message, make sure, yeah. So this is from our library of emails. And so you'll see that like this is everything that is needed to create the email that looks like this largely. And then it's like inserting encoded links that are unique to each individual and yada, yada, yada. Recently, I changed the single source of truth for this from having the stories field that anytime it would be updated here, it would push to 4 other bases, because the prior iteration of allowing people to update, there's a duplicate of this base, which is basically a pass through. So anytime someone wants to change their information, they submit a new record, and then Zapier finds that person's email, matches it in the base, and updates the record, because form view for Airtable only creates a new record, it doesn't update.
Right.
And so you have to duplicate the base and kind of do that pass through, which now is totally done with mini extensions. So I'm kind of like phasing out a lot of pieces. Right. There's not really a need for them to be 2 bases, but this was kind of the base that I started with. It's the first base I ever built. It's evolved over time. It's just kind of been, can I do that? Can I catch this? Is there a webhook for that? How do I do a webhook? What scripts? Holy shit, you can make buttons. It was actually something I yelled at my fiance relatively recently.
Button fields, is that you're referring to? Yeah, when they added button fields. I don't know. I was so happy to be in that beta, because that's like, my scripts, they'll be so much better now.
Yeah, button fields and scripts, and then so we have a script that once when someone updates okay, so here's our library of messages that can be sent through the resonance machine.
Yep.
When someone is a co-creator, so here are the co-creators of each individual message. When any one of these people logs in to the portal that is created with many extensions, they have the ability to edit every single one of the messages that's in the library that they are co-creator on. Anytime they edit that, which is a rich text field, then it gets picked up by Airtable automations, and then it sends a webhook, also a many extensions thing, to convert the rich text into HTML. Then it runs there's a delay because it has to do that. It takes about 30 seconds. And then our script picks up and then takes that raw HTML and appends Google UTM tracking links with the term, which we can then see in real time. And basically, as people are exploring, clicking, and reading Mythos, we have the ability to see in real time their journey. It's more of a qualitative process of kind of seeing how people move through it. All of this was just like, how do I see see people in keywords rather than having to like look up my URLs? Like, how can I see that? Okay, cool. Like, let's play with this. Can I add those programmatically? Okay, yes, I can. Oh, no, I can't do it because of the term. Like, the term is a variable field. Hold on, let me go to the forum and see if there's anyone who can do this. You can do this? Great, thank you for that piece of code. And it's just been that for 3 years. And so it's always just a question of, like, okay, that was of value. Can we measure it? Can we measure it programmatically? Every time someone was registering for an event, we used to do that through Eventbrite. So we could pick that up, we could match the record, we could automatically gift them credit for attending an event. We now have the ability to embed, we have a digital environment called Topia. And within Topia, there's not a clickable field in here. So this is my fiance and I's wedding venue. So we'll get to see that. And so in Topia, you have the ability to walk around. If you walk up to another person, then it opens up a video chat with that person. But then you can also make objects clickable. And so did I remove the click? No, I didn't. Okay, stop walking. Nope. No, I did remove the click. All right, so this used to be clickable. And so basically, why? It's because I'm logged in as an admin. Okay, well, normally it's clickable and normally it opens an iframe within the environment. And so basically, what this enables us to do is to have portals to where people can actually interact with the economy, and they can give resonance dollars through the love machine within that virtual environment. And they can interact with different stories of the cooperative without ever leaving. So it's all kind of tied together in ways that are very challenging to explain, because it wasn't a linear build process. It was just like can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? And over time, we rebuilt, we cleaned up, we rebuilt, we cleaned up, things broke, we fixed them, and yada, 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 every base. But yeah, to anyone who's listening and thinks this is super cool, don't consider your beginning to be don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle. And it's just play with it bit by bit. I mean, we have probably 10 or 20 bases, 15 of which are just kind of constantly like test bases or playing around, or can we make an entire product without ever, deploying any code? Yeah, it's been a journey.
I'm sure it has. It's just great to see, because I like seeing Airtable bases. I wouldn't be here if I didn't, but I also like seeing how people are able to pull together a front end, if you will, to Airtable. Not everyone is used to looking at things in the database or table environment, and we're kind of used to an app-like experience. And and I'm glad you brought up Topia, because seeing mini extensions forming a sort of portal, that's one way of having your different citizens interact without having to jump into the base itself. But then something on the other end of spectrum, where you're literally walking around a digital forest, if you will, until you get close to the thing you want to interact with. Had someone told me a week ago that you could turn your Airtable base into something like that, I would have been like, how? And now I know.
Yeah. And Topia just embedded iframes maybe a week or two ago. And all the co-creators of Topia are citizens. So we've been really enjoying being kind of on the leading edge of that and just playing with it. And we've, my fiance and I are building out the space basically as like a museum of our relationship. And so you can click on everything and you can see kind of like all the aspects of it. But you can also discover stuff. So using UTM codes and pre-filled fields, you can actually embed a physical object into a virtual environment, and depending on the size of the object and where it's placed, it can be harder or easier to find. And with the encoded link linking into the mini extensions portal, which then goes into Airtable, you have a treasure hunt. And so it's a lot of like, I mean, it happens a lot where like I learn to use something, like I learned to use an encoder link, or I learned to use a pre-fill field, and then for the next week I'm like, and just like constantly like, where can I apply that? And where can I break it in a lot of instances? But I can't stress the importance of play. Having a space, even if you can't do it through your work, having a space where you can explore and create is essential, because if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have learned any of this and we wouldn't have any of this. If I had set out to build something and build an app that investors would invest in, none of this would exist. So really just like that, I mean, that's the one of the core tenets of One Inc is playing and uniting work with art and saying, let's create space and let's find ways of financing that space without changing the implications of what we're doing. I have Finite and Infinite Games by James B. Karsh by my heels, and it's there are at least two types of games. There are finite games, which are played for the purpose of winning, and there are infinite games, which are played for the purpose of continuing play. And raising money into a venture to later exit and make a lot of money, that's a finite game. Creating a cooperative where you can continue the cooperative and ever expand it to include more people, that we see as an infinite one. And yeah, having a living system of relationships, which is kind of like the citizen table, exchanges, which is the ledger, balances, which is kind of like merit in the community, gifts, which is like how we know to give back and forth, frames, which is the language that we use, right? You're just looking at all of these ways of transferring energy, if you kind of go at the highest level possible, transferring energy between people, which are, in a frame, characters and stories or projects. And it's all just about moving that energy back and forth, whether that energy be money or communication or storytelling. It's just energy. And yeah, I think database thinking has really helped me to see that more tangibly, versus seeing it kind of like empathetically.
Makes sense. Databases do kind of make you think about things in sort of a practical sense, if you will. Just, the simply asking yourself the question, to what does this link? I think kind of sets the bar for me when in terms of getting a thing to work. And so just you talking about like the endlessness of play. For some reason, I have cornered the market in making scheduling things for Airtable. When they came out with the scripting block, I made 5 different versions of the same scripts that all basically do the same thing, but incrementally better, and in custom blocks. I was like, guess he's making a scheduling block, and I did it. And so whatever else they have lined up in their whatever next product they're going to release, I'm going to be playing around with it to make something that schedules something or other, because apparently that's what I do now. And I don't have any personal use case for it, but that's kind of how I build skills. Just, there's always something to improve upon. And, I've kind of adopted that in my own life, specifically related to that. So
yeah, the mini extensions block is going to be fantastically useful for another project, which is the Museum of Domains. So museumofdomains.com, and it's a virtual museum, but thanks to Topia, you'll actually be able to walk around the museum. And thanks to Airtable and mini extensions, you'll be able to submit things to the museum. So like you take the calendar block, and it's like having an idea and then figuring out, can I do this? And then iterating and improving is how you learn. The thing that I've experienced in consulting, especially with growth hacking, is that ideas are hard. It's a muscle. You got to work it. And over time it becomes easier. Like I'll say something and it's like, oh my God, you always know what to do. I'm like, it's a muscle. The more you work it, the more that you exchange ideas. Spiritual Bro actually was Guru Clippy. I would tell this story of like, my advisor's been telling me to say more positive things, stop saying I need, because it's implying lack. And I would say something and then 10 minutes later be like, why did I say it that way? I know I'm not supposed to, because I know that that's like causing harm to myself. And so I made this joke of like, we should create an app. And I thought it was like the spiritual, the woo-woo version of Clippy. And I
from
told
Microsoft Word.
right. So thank you for being in the minority of people who actually got that joke.
I was born in the 90s. I
thought
remember
everybody
things.
in the 90s would get that. No one largely. It would anyway. So I told the story, and then the punchline was, we're gonna make it. It's called Guru Clippy. And I just kind of got this, like, I don't know, 80 to 90% of people would be like, responding to a verbal story. They'd be like, cool, wait, what's Clippy again? Or, and so it didn't click. And then when I had already bought Spiritual Bro, I thought it was going to be something else. And then when I switched out the punchline, it was instantaneously 100% of the people who heard that story with the punchline Spiritual Bro. They're like, that's amazing. And I would play with the length. I would, compress it down to like, how quickly can I get someone to be like, I want that. And it got down to a sentence. And so Museum of Domains had been that. And then we put it, it was originally one of the first Airtable products that I built was registered under theinfluence.com. Which is basically a base for people who have purchased and registered domain names when they were not sober. And then that, because I like to buy a lot of domain names, that later became Museum of Domains. And then now, because of many extensions, I'm like, oh, cool. I have the ability to make an interface where people can submit a domain that they purchased and the story as to why they purchased it and the state of that domain. And then people can collectively manage their own domains. I don't have to do anything. And so building something that's self-maintaining has been an interesting challenge, and mini extensions is really a big unlock for that for us. And it's super versatile. Like if, later down the road, we'll build a cohesive product that is the economy without, I call it duct tape coding, but without this much duct tape coding. But still, mini extensions and stuff like, Museum of Domains is both a fantastic opportunity for learning, a fantastic opportunity to validate an idea, a fantastic opportunity to build an MVP with no code. And with, Airtable's $25 a month for a pro plan and mini extensions is $39. So for under $100 in software as a service, you can just crank out apps, which is seemingly what mini extensions is doing. And they're all great.
Their release schedule is absolutely insane. I love them.
Yeah. I asked like a pretty potent question the other day through support, and they're like, we just deployed a new version. I'm like, what? Yeah. I'm still figuring it out, but you'll be able to open, when you embed their widget into your website, you'll be able to open and edit a record without it bouncing out to a new tab.
I'm telling you, if you don't already use mini extensions, go ahead. Just try them out, because they have so many different things, so many different components that are so very useful, and it fills in the gaps that are often left by Airtable's vanilla platform, if you will. And in some regards, that's fine. Not every program is going to be perfect, and the world of tech, we're probably going to see Airtable shift over the course of time, or maybe be replaced by something else. Who knows in the future? It's seeing projects like yours that really, what is the right word? That exemplify, I suppose, that really exemplify that to make something great, odds are you probably will be using more than one thing. Mm-hmm. Like no castle is built with only bricks or only stone. This is a terrible analogy, but the important thing is, I'm glad you've shown it to us. You've shown us a great many things, and we'll put the links to them all in the description below, so that you can join and also just walk around that little virtual world. I don't want to invite everyone to your wedding because that would be weird, but
it's probably making its way to Reddit at some point. So I think that bridge.
Everyone go to Brian's wedding.
Topia.io/present and Topia.io/citizens are our virtual. They're much more fun when people are there. So go relatively 9 to 5 on weekdays. Usually when we hang out there. But yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to nerd out and share. I mean, I think that I thought Airtable was amazing. I got super deep into Zapier. I, for a very long time, actively avoided Airtable's marketing emails and Airtable's forums, and Zapier less so. But like, I mean, we, Chantel and I, like, we use Splitwise for just like household stuff. And we have a channel for our wedding, and kind of like the moniker of our relationship. And I'm like, does Splitwise integrate with Zapier? Like, can we just like comically tell everybody in our community like what we're spending on like household, stuff, just because it's funny? Yes, is the answer to that question. And so it gets really addicting. So I think an adage that's been really potent for me is like, nothing can be learned exclusively through education, and nothing can be learned exclusively through practice. It has to be a mix of both.
Yep.
And mini extensions, I probably learned for about 30 minutes to an hour before I started like seeing like, can I build what I want to build? And I did. And then I went on a week vacation this past week, and I just, in like 30 minutes, what I showed of the stories of the cooperative, the gallery view, the reading list, and the portfolio, which I'll fix in 10 seconds after we finish. I built all of those in collectively maybe an hour.
Wow.
Because every single time you build something into your base, it's there and you can draw from it. And you can parse that data and show it in so many different ways for so many different purposes. And having portals into that, which mini extensions is really great about, and having interconnections through that, which Zapier is fantastic about, and having like automations and backups and visualizations, which OnToAir is fantastic about. Like, it is very much, there's 5 different ways to do it, but just playing with it and finding out, asking the question, can we, it gets really addicting, I will say. Super, super, super addicting. And I definitely have spent more time building than I have spent using. And that's actually changing as of Monday. Kind of like cool, like not a moratorium, not a whole moratorium on building new features, but like a radical pullback, because the last few months, really just seeing time in quarantine and seeing what needed to be done, just jumped in and went for it.
Makes sense. You can't, there is something called over engineering. So, I will leave you to be the expert on the subject. It seems as though you already are. Thank you so much.
Everyone's answer is going to be, that's the one I would love to teach. That's very much a subjective decision as to when to stop building, but
yeah. I never know. I will never stop building things that schedule other things.
Make a coin toss.
Just now's the time. All right.
I'll make a coin toss app in Airtable so that I can flip it and decide when I should stop building.
You're gonna get to the point where you're going to say, maybe I should stop, and then Spiritual Bro will come in and say, no, never stop.
I will add that into, also Spiritual Bro is built on Airtable, so all of the corrections are in Airtable database.
Airtable, the back end to all things great.
Including our wedding. All of it. All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity and the questions and the excitement about nerdy things. And I look forward to maybe someday dabbling into your Airtable history of your in the forum. I feel like that's its own rabbit hole.
It's a lot. Be prepared. Prepared. I'm on a quest to earn every badge. But thank you so much for being part of our podcast. Everyone check out the links below. I promise you will not be disappointed by any of them. And see ya.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to give it a like or hit us up on social at BuiltOnAir. We always love to hear your comments and suggestions. And don't forget to subscribe to catch new episodes when they release. It helps us keep the podcast going.